Standard 6, Subject English, Unit 4.7, The Sword in the Stone. Let us read and understand this lesson, The Sword in the Stone. King Arthur, famous in legends and history as one of the bravest and noblest kings of Britain, grew up as an orphaned youth before destiny intervened in the form of his protector and guardian, Merlin the magician, to reveal his true identity to the people of Britain. In ancient Britain, at a time when the land was invaded by wild barbarians, the good and noble Lord Uther fought them bravely and drove them away from his land. The people made him king of Britain and gave him the title Pendragon, meaning dragon's head. King Uther Pendragon ruled Britain wisely and well. The people were content, but very soon the king died. It was thought that he had been poisoned by some traitors. There was no heir to the throne of Britain. The powerful lords and knights who had been kept under control by King Uther now began to demand that one of them should be crowned king of Britain. Rivalry grew amongst the lords, and the country as a whole began to suffer. Armed robbers roamed the countryside, pillaging farms and fields. People felt unsafe and insecure in their own homes. Fear gripped the country, and lawlessness prevailed over the divided kingdom. This is a legend of King Arthur, famous in history as one of the bravest and noblest kings of Britain. He grew up as an orphaned youth before destiny or fate intervened in the form of his protector and guardian Merlin the magician, who revealed his true identity to the people of Britain. In ancient Britain, at a time when the land was invaded by wild barbarians, the meaning of barbarians is wild or uncivilized people, the good and noble Lord Uther fought them bravely and drove them away from his land. The people made him king of Britain and gave him the title Pendragon, meaning dragon's head. King Uther Pendragon ruled Britain wisely and well. But the king had many enemies and his life was in constant danger. He ruled Britain so well that the people were happy, they were contented with his rule. But very soon the king died. It was thought that he had been poisoned by some traitors. Traitors are people who go against their country. The king died and there was no heir to the throne of Britain. There was no successor. The powerful lords and knights who had been kept under control by King Uther now began to demand that one of them should be crowned king of Britain. Rivalry grew amongst the lords, and the country as a whole began to suffer. Armed robbers roamed the countryside, pillaging, plundering, and looting farms and fields. The people felt unsafe and insecure in their own homes. Fear gripped the entire country, and lawlessness prevailed over the divided kingdom. Nearly 16 years had passed since the death of Lord Uther. All the lords and knights of Britain had assembled at the great church of London for Christmas. On Christmas morning, just as they were leaving the church, a strange sight drew their attention. In the churchyard was a large stone, and on it an anvil of steel, and in the steel a naked sword was held, and about it was written in letters of gold, Whoso pulleth out this sword is by right of birth King of England. Many of the knights could not hold themselves back. Fancying themselves as future kings, they rushed to the stone and attempted to draw the sword from its steel anvil. They pulled with all their might, but none of them could so much as move the sword. Obviously, the man who might draw the sword and prove himself to be our rightful king is not amongst us this morning, said the Archbishop. However, every man who wishes to try his hand at drawing this sword is free to do so for the next few days. He who draws the sword will be crowned king. And to celebrate the appearance of this magnificent sword and prepare ourselves for the arrival of our future king, we will hold a magnificent tournament on New Year's Day. In this paragraph, we learn that 16 years had passed since the death of Lord Uther, and there was no heir to the throne of Britain. All the lords and knights of Britain had assembled at the great church of London for Christmas. On Christmas morning, just as they were leaving the church, a strange sight drew their attention. In the churchyard was a large stone, and on it an anvil of steel, and in the steel there was a naked sword, and about it was written in letters of gold that whosoever pulls out this sword is by right of birth King of England. Many of the knights could not hold themselves back. They fancied themselves as future king. Therefore, they rushed to the stone and attempted to pull the sword from its steel anvil. They pulled the sword with all their might, but none of them could move the sword. The archbishop said that the man who might draw the sword and prove himself to be the rightful king is not amongst them that morning. However, every man who wishes to try his hand at pulling out the sword is free to do so for the next few days. And he who draws or pulls out the sword will be crowned king. To celebrate the appearance of this magnificent sword and prepare themselves for the arrival of their future king, the archbishop said that they would hold a magnificent tournament on New Year's Day. On New Year's Day, a great number of young and brave knights gathered to attend the church service. After that, they met in the field nearby to participate in the great tournament. Dukes and counts, earls, barons, and knights crowded onto the field. Among them was Sir Hector, a noble knight. He was accompanied by his two sons, Sir Kay and young Arthur. Kay was his own son who had been recently knighted. Arthur, whom he had brought up as a foster son, was actually an orphan whom he had raised as his own child. The good Sir Hector loved both his sons dearly. On New Year's Day, a great number of young and brave knights gathered to attend the church service. After the church service, they met in the field nearby to participate in the great tournament. Dukes, counts, earls, barons, and knights crowded onto the field. Among these knights and barons was Sir Hector, a noble knight. Knight is a man who has been given a special honor by the king. Sir Hector was accompanied by his two sons, Sir Kay and young Arthur. Kay was his own son who had been recently knighted. Arthur was his foster son. He was actually an orphan whom he had raised as his own child. Sir Hector loved both his sons dearly. He loved both Kay as well as Arthur. As Sir Kay was preparing to join the tournament, he realized that he had left his sword behind at home. Hastily, he summoned his younger brother and said to him, "Arthur, you want me to win this tournament, don't you? Then you must help me out. Take my horse and gallop home as fast as you can. Get my sword and rush back here at once." "I am going," called Arthur, rushing off at once. "You shall have your sword sooner than you think." As he rushed past the church, a glint of steel caught his eye, the blade of a sword shining brightly in the morning sun. The sword was mounted on an anvil on top of a block of marble right in the middle of the churchyard. It was the magic sword in the stone, but Arthur knew nothing about it. All he saw was a sword that was available for taking. "Kay shall have his sword straight away," Arthur said to himself. He ran up to the stone, seized the sword by the handle, and drew it out effortlessly. He rushed back to his brother and handed the sword to him, breathless with excitement. "You are back very soon," Sir Kay said to him. "But hey, this is not my sword." "No, it isn't," smiled Arthur. "I thought it would take me too long to get home and bring your sword. I found this sword in the churchyard. It looked good, and I thought you could use it just for today. We will, of course, put it back when the games are over." Here in this paragraph, we come to know that Sir Kay was also preparing to join the tournament, but suddenly he realized that he had left his sword at home. He called his younger brother Arthur, and asks him for help. He tells him to take his horse and gallop home. The meaning of gallop is ride the horse very fast, reach home, and get his sword at once. Arthur readily accepted to go home, and he tells his brother Kay that he would have his sword sooner than he thought. As Arthur rushed past the church, a glint of steel caught his eye. The meaning of glint is small, bright flashes of light. It was the blade of the sword that was shining brightly in the morning sun. We know that this sword was mounted on an anvil on top of a block of marble. It was in the middle of the churchyard. This sword was a magic sword, but Arthur knew nothing about it. All he saw was a sword that was available for taking, and he felt that he could give this sword to his brother Kay. He ran up to the stone, seized the sword by the handle, and drew it out without any effort. And he rushed back to his brother Kay and handed him over the sword. He was quite excited, breathless with excitement. Kay tells Arthur that he was back very soon, and he looks at the sword that Arthur gives him. He realized that this sword was not his sword. Arthur smiled and tells him yes, that it wasn't his sword. He saw this sword in the churchyard, and he thought that he could take it because if he would go home to get Kay's sword, it would take him very long. Therefore, he decides to pull out the sword which was in the churchyard. He felt that it looked good and it could be of use for Kay. Arthur then tells Kay that he could use the sword for the tournament that day, and then they could put it back where it was after the games were over. Sir Kay stood speechless, staring at his younger brother. He knew all about the magic sword and what it signified, but Arthur was unaware of it all. Arthur had always been a brave and valiant boy, and he had excelled in fencing and archery. He adored his father and his half-brother, and his dream was to become the squire to his dashing brother. And now, without even knowing what it implied, Arthur had drawn the magic sword from the stone. Kay's mind was working rapidly. He actually held the sword of the stone in his hand, the very same sword that the strongest and best knights could not so much as grip or get hold of. Sir Kay seized the sword and ran to their father, leaving a bewildered Arthur behind him. He said to Sir Hector, "Father, father, this is the sword of the stone, and I have it in my hand. I am the rightful king of Britain." Here in this paragraph, we learn that when Sir Kay saw the sword that Arthur had pulled out, he stood speechless and he began staring at his younger brother. Sir Kay knew all about the magic sword and what it signified, what it implied. We know it signified that the one who pulls out the sword is the rightful king of Britain. Sir Kay knew about it, but Arthur was not aware. Arthur had always been a brave and valiant boy, and he excelled in fencing and archery. Fencing is the sport of fighting with swords. Arthur adored his father, Sir Hector, and his half-brother Kay, and his dream was to become a squire to his dashing brother. The meaning of squire is a young man who is an assistant to a knight before becoming a knight himself. So he wanted to be a squire to his brother Kay, his dashing brother Kay, who was a knight himself. So Arthur wanted to be his squire. And now Arthur had drawn the magic sword from the stone, but he did not know what it implied. We know it implied that the one who pulls out the sword is the rightful king of Britain, but Arthur was not aware of it. Kay knew all about it, and now his mind was working rapidly. He held that sword of stone in his hand, the very same sword that the strongest and the best knights could not so much grip or get hold of. We know that all the lords and the best knights, they could not pull that sword from the stone, and he had that sword of the sword in his hand. Sir Kay seized that sword from Arthur's hand and ran to his father, leaving Arthur bewildered. Bewildered is highly confused. He ran to his father, Sir Hector, and tells his father that this is the sword of the stone and that he has it in his hand. Therefore, he is the rightful king of Britain. Sir Hector was a wise man. How did you get hold of this sword, son? He asked his eldest born. What does that matter? I have it in my hand. It was meant to be mine. Isn't that enough? Kay retorted angrily. That's not enough, said the father quietly. How did you get hold of this sword? I've got it, and that's what matters, Kay replied, stubborn as ever. Well then, come with me, Sir Hector said, and led his son inside the great church, which was now empty. Taking the holy book from the choir, Sir Hector said to his son, Swear on the holy book that you drew the sword from the stone. Sir Kay lowered his eyes. He could not face his father now. How did you come by the sword, son? Sir Hector asked him once again. Arthur brought it to me, father, said Kay, still with his eyes lowered. Bring Arthur here, and let the three of us go to the churchyard, Sir Hector told him. We have to know the truth about this. Soon the three of them were at the churchyard. Here in this paragraph, we learn that Sir Hector was a wise man. He wanted to know from Sir Kay how he had got hold of the sword. Kay replied angrily that he has the sword in his hand and that is enough to prove that the sword was his. Sir Hector was not happy with this reply and wanted to know from Sir Kay how he got hold of the sword. Kay replied stubbornly that he has got the sword and that is what matters. Sir Hector was still not satisfied with this reply, and he leads his son inside the great church, which was then empty. He took the holy book from the choir, and Sir Hector tells Kay to swear on the holy book that he drew the sword from the stone. We know that Sir Kay had told a lie. Therefore, he lowered his eyes and he could not face his father then. Once again, Sir Hector asked Kay how he got hold of the sword. Finally, Kay admitted and told Sir Hector that it was Arthur who had brought the sword to him. Sir Hector then tells Kay to bring Arthur there and that the three of them should go to the churchyard. Sir Hector tells Kay that they need to know the truth about this sword. Soon the three of them, Sir Hector, Sir Kay and Arthur, were at the churchyard. Put the sword back on its anvil, Sir Hector said to Kay. But try as he might, Kay could not put the sword back. It struck the anvil and slid off the block. Arthur saw what was happening and thought that his father was angry with them because he thought the sword was stolen. Sir Hector had always told his sons, what matters most for a knight is integrity, being honest and truthful at all times, on all occasions. Arthur stepped forward impulsively. Here, let me put it back, he said, and taking the mighty sword from his elder brother, he thrust it back on the anvil and it slipped in neatly. I assure you, father, I did not steal the sword. Kay needed a sword urgently, and I did not want to keep him waiting. Rather than ride all the way home, I decided to take the sword which I found in the churchyard. And see, it is back in its place now. I fully intended to put it back in place after the tournament. And glancing at his brother, he added, I am sure that is what Kay would have told me to do. Wouldn't you, brother? Sir Kay did not speak a word. All right, Arthur, I believe you, said Sir Hector. Now let me see you draw that sword out as you did the first time. First, you, Kay. But try as he might, Kay could not so much as grip the handle, and he could not move the sword however hard he tried. Now it's your turn, Arthur, said Sir Hector sternly. Arthur gripped the handle of the sword and drew the sword out gently but firmly. Sir Hector made him repeat the action again and again. Each time Arthur gripped the handle and drew the sword out without any hesitation. Here in this paragraph, we learn that Sir Hector tells Sir Kay to put the sword back on its anvil. But as much as he could try, Kay could not do so. He could not put the sword back in its anvil. It just slid off the block. Arthur saw what was happening and he thought that his father was angry with them because probably his father thought that the sword was stolen by them. So Hector always told his son that what matters most for a knight is integrity. Meaning of integrity is honesty, having strong moral principles. He always told his sons that they should be honest and truthful at all times and on all occasions. Arthur was aware of this and therefore he stepped forward impulsively. Impulsively is acting suddenly. And he tells his father, Sir Hector and Kay, that let him put back the sword in its anvil. He took the mighty sword from his elder brother Kay's hand and he thrust it back on the anvil and it slipped in very neatly. And he assured his father that he did not steal the sword. His brother Kay needed a sword urgently and he did not want to keep him waiting. His brother told him to go home and get his own sword, but Arthur thought that instead of riding all the way home, he decided to take the sword which he saw in the churchyard or which he found in the churchyard. And then he tells his father that now he has already put the sword back on its anvil and he had intended to do so after the tournament. He looked at his brother and he tells his brother that probably that is what he too would do. Sir Kay did not speak a word because he was ashamed. He had told his father a lie that he had pulled the sword out and therefore he was speechless now once again. Sir Hector tells Arthur that he would like to see how he drew the sword out the first time he did it. Before he could tell Arthur to do so, he asked Kay to try. Kay could not grip the handle nor could he move the sword from its anvil. Then he tells Arthur to do so. Arthur gripped the handle of the sword and drew the sword out gently but firmly. Sir Hector could not believe this and he asked him to repeat the action again and again. And each time Arthur gripped the handle, he drew the sword out without any hesitation. Sir Hector made him repeat the action again and again. Each time Arthur gripped the handle and drew the sword out without any hesitation. Sir Hector was overwhelmed. He fell on his knees before his young son, who held the mighty sword in his hand, and bowed his head in deep devotion. Wordlessly, Kay followed his example. Arthur jumped back in surprise. "Father, why do you kneel before me? Am I not your son?" "This is what I had thought until now," Sir Hector replied. "But now I know better. I know whose son you are. You are the son of the good King Uther Pendragon, and I bow to you. as you are the King of Britain now. How could that be? You and I know that I was an orphan boy entrusted to your care." Silently, Sir Hector pointed to the inscription on the stone which Arthur had not seen until now. "Whoso pulleth out this sword is by right of birth King of England." "But it can't be me, father. I am your son, and I shall always remain your son." In this paragraph, we learn that Sir Hector made Arthur repeat the action of pulling the sword again and again. Arthur gripped the handle and drew the sword out without any hesitation or without any effort. Sir Hector was overwhelmed. He fell on his knees before his young son, who held the mighty sword in his hand, and Sir Hector bowed his head in deep devotion. Kay also followed his father's example. Arthur jumped back in surprise. He was surprised to see his father and his brother Kay bowing before him. Arthur tells his father that since he is his son, he should not kneel before him. Sir Hector tells Arthur that this is what he had thought until then, but now he knows well that he is the son of the good King Uther Pendragon, and he bows to him as he is the King of Britain. Arthur could not believe this. He tells Sir Hector that he and Sir Hector knows that he was an orphan boy entrusted to his care. Silently, Sir Hector pointed to the inscription on the stone which Arthur had not seen. The inscription read that whosoever pulleth out or pulls the sword out is by right of birth King of England. Arthur did not believe this, and he tells Sir Hector that it is not possible, that he is his son, and he would always remain his son. There was a flash of light, and Merlin appeared before them, a hooded figure with bright shining eyes and bewitching smile. Lovingly he laid his hand on Arthur's head and said to him, "Indeed, I was the one who entrusted you to good Sir Hector for your own safety. Your father and I knew that great danger lay ahead for the kingdom and yourself. No sooner than you were born, your father blessed you and handed you over to me with the solemn request that you would take your rightful place on the throne of England when it was safe for you to do so." Turning to Sir Hector, Merlin said, "In the name of the late King Uther, I thank you. You have done a splendid job of bringing up the heir to the British throne. Now you must inform the Archbishop and your fellow knights of all that has happened here. I shall await your return." We learn that suddenly there was a flash of light and Merlin the magician appeared before them. And he was a hooded figure with bright shining eyes and a bewitching smile. And he laid his hand on Arthur's head and tells him that it was he who had entrusted him to good Sir Hector. Here Merlin took the baby to Sir Hector and made him promise to bring him up as his own son. So Arthur was given to Sir Hector in order that he would look after him and bring him up as his own son. It was done for his own safety because King Uther Pendragon and Merlin knew that there was great danger for the kingdom and for Arthur. So as soon as Arthur was born, his father Uther Pendragon blessed him and handed him over to Merlin with a request that he would take the rightful place on the throne of England when it was safe for him to do so. And then Merlin tells Sir Hector that he thanks him for he has done a splendid job of bringing up the heir to the British throne, and that now Sir Hector must inform the Archbishop and all the other fellow knights of all that happened there. He then tells him that he would await his return. Forthwith Sir Hector called upon the Archbishop, and all the lords assembled at the tournament. Holding Arthur by the hand, he announced to the assembly, "Behold the rightful King of England." For a moment there was silence, and then the crowd burst out in angry protest. "How can we believe you? Who is this unknown boy? Where did he come from? How is he any better than one of us?" The Archbishop took them all to the churchyard. The entire assemblage watched in awe as Arthur inserted the sword in the anvil and drew it out effortlessly. Some of the lords and knights also tried to draw the sword but failed to do so. In this paragraph, we learn that Sir Hector called upon the Archbishop immediately, forthwith is immediately or at once, and all the lords assembled at the tournament. Holding Arthur by the hand, he announced to the assembly that Arthur was the rightful king of England. For a moment there was silence, and the crowd burst out in angry protest. They could not believe that Arthur was the rightful king of England. They felt that Arthur was an unknown boy, and they wanted to know where did he come from and how was he any better than any one of them. The Archbishop then took all the lords and knights to the churchyard. The entire assemblage is the group of people, all the lords and the knights watched in wonder or awe as Arthur inserted the sword in the anvil and drew it out without any effort. Some of the lords and knights also tried to draw the sword, but they failed to do so. Again and yet again Arthur drew the sword from the stone before his people. Each time cheers went up, and each time more and more knights drew their swords and held them high in a gesture of loyalty to their new found prince. Loud cheers rose from the common people who had surrounded the churchyard, eager to greet their new king. Now Merlin stepped out of the shadows and addressed the crowds. "Behold, O people of Britain, I present to you the one and only son of King Uther Pendragon and his queen. He is your rightful king." In this paragraph, we learn that Arthur drew the sword from the stone again and again before his people. Each time there were cheers, and each time more and more knights drew their swords high in a gesture of loyalty to their new-found prince. Loud cheers rose from the common people who had surrounded the churchyard, eager to greet their new king. Merlin the magician, he stepped out of the shadows and addressed the crowds by saying, "Behold, O people of Britain, I present to you the one and only son of King Uther Pendragon and his queen. He is your rightful king." So Merlin tells the crowd that Arthur, the son of King Uther Pendragon and his queen, he was the rightful king of Britain.